If God is setting you apart, elevation is closer than you think. There are seasons when life grows strangely quiet, when momentum slows and familiar connections begin to fade. You may sense that you are no longer moving with the crowd, no longer fitting into places that once felt natural. It can feel unsettling, even painful, especially when you carry a deep awareness that God has placed something significant inside you. But this quiet narrowing is often not loss. It is preparation. Before God elevates a life, He almost always sets it apart. Being set apart by God does not feel like honor at first. It feels like isolation, misunderstanding, and denial. You may wonder why your path seems harder, why progress feels slower, or why others seem to move ahead while you remain unseen. Yet throughout the Bible, God consistently works this way. He draws His chosen ones away before He lifts them up. He removes them from noise before He gives them a voice. He teaches them obedience in private before trusting them with influence in public. When God begins setting you apart, He starts dealing deeply with your heart. Old desires lose their grip. Familiar comforts no longer satisfy. You become sensitive to things you once ignored, and convictions rise where there was once ease. This is not punishment, it is refinement. God is reshaping your inner life so that when elevation comes, it does not destroy you. This season can feel lonely, because it often cannot be explained. Others may not understand your boundaries, your stillness, or your unwillingness to settle. But God is not asking you to blend in. He is asking you to be prepared. Elevation exposes character, magnifies weaknesses, and tests motives. That is why God never rushes this process. He would rather take time setting you apart than elevate you too soon and watch you fall. If you feel slowed down, restricted, or separated in ways you did not choose, do not assume something is wrong. God often hides His greatest work in quiet places. What feels like delay may be protection. What feels like isolation may be alignment. And what feels like loss may actually be God clearing space for what He is about to release. Being set apart is not the end of your story. It is the evidence that God is writing it carefully. Before He lifts you higher, He is grounding you deeper. Before He elevates you publicly, He is preparing you privately. And when the time comes, you will realize this season was not meant to break you, but to build you for what only God could give. Number 1, God begins to isolate you in ways you did not choose. One of the first signs that God is setting you apart before He elevates you is a season of isolation that you did not ask for and cannot fully explain. People who once surrounded you begin to drift. Invitations slow down. Conversations feel shallow. You may still be among others, yet feel deeply alone. This kind of isolation is not rejection. It is divine positioning. God is not pushing you away from people, He is pulling you closer to Himself. In the Bible, isolation always preceded elevation. Moses spent years alone in the wilderness before leading a nation. David was overlooked and hidden in the fields before becoming king. Paul spent time in obscurity before stepping into his calling. God isolates not to harm, but to prepare. He removes unnecessary noise so your spirit can hear Him clearly. This isolation forces you to confront yourself. Without constant affirmation or distraction, you begin to see what truly drives you. Your fears surface. Your faith is tested. Your dependence shifts. You learn how to stand without applause and trust God without witnesses. This is where character is formed, where motives are purified and obedience becomes personal. It can be painful when the support you expected disappears. You may wonder why God would allow this loneliness when you are already carrying so much. But isolation is often protection. God knows that elevation exposes you, and He will not elevate what has not been strengthened in solitude. He is teaching you how to draw strength from Him alone. If you feel isolated right now, resist the urge to fill the silence with anything that distracts you from God's work. This season is not empty. It is intentional. God is shaping your inner life, aligning your spirit, and anchoring you deeply in Him. Because when elevation comes, you will not crumble under pressure. You will stand firm, rooted in the intimacy you learned when no one else was around. Number 2. God removes you from familiar comforts and old patterns. Another sign that God is setting you apart is when He begins removing you from familiar comforts and old patterns that once defined your life. Things that felt safe, predictable, or even enjoyable start losing their grip. Routines are disrupted. Environments change. What once felt natural now feels restrictive. This shift can be deeply uncomfortable, because comfort is often where we find security, but comfort is rarely where we grow. Before God elevates someone, He breaks cycles that would limit them. He knows that old patterns cannot sustain new levels of responsibility, influence, or purpose. So He begins to shake what is familiar, not to confuse you, but to free you. God will not carry you higher while you are still anchored to habits, mindsets, or environments that belong to a previous season. In Scripture, God consistently moved His chosen ones out of comfort zones before elevating them. Abraham had to leave his homeland. Joseph had to leave his father's house. Ruth had to leave what she knew to step into what God had prepared. Elevation always required movement, and movement always required release. This process can feel like loss. You may grieve what you are leaving behind. You may feel unsteady without the things you relied on. But God is not removing comfort to be cruel. He is making room for calling. He is teaching you to trust Him instead of familiarity, to depend on His direction instead of routine. If you are experiencing disruption, don't fight it. Ask what God is trying to build in you. Old patterns may have served you once, but they cannot carry you into what God is preparing. He is setting you apart so you won't be confined by what you've outgrown. When God removes comfort, He replaces it with purpose. And when He breaks old patterns, He establishes new foundations. This is not regression. It is preparation for elevation that will require strength, flexibility, and faith beyond what comfort could ever produce. Number 3. God sharpens your conviction and sensitivity to His voice. When God is setting you apart before He elevates you, one of the most noticeable changes happens inside you. Your spirit becomes more sensitive. Things you once overlooked now trouble you. Compromises you once justified now disrupt your peace. You don't lose joy, you lose tolerance for what distances you from God. This sharpening of conviction is not heaviness, it is alignment. You begin to notice that God's voice becomes clearer, while other voices lose their authority over your decisions. Opinions that once influenced you no longer carry the same weight. You start pausing before speaking, praying before deciding, and listening more than reacting. God is training your inner ear because elevation requires discernment. Influence without discernment leads to destruction. In the Bible, those God elevated learned to recognize His voice in seasons when obedience was costly. Samuel learned to hear God in the stillness of night. David learned to inquire of the Lord before battles. Jesus Himself said He did only what He saw the Father doing. Spiritual sensitivity is not automatic. It is cultivated through surrender and attention. This heightened conviction can feel uncomfortable because it separates you from what others find normal. You may feel different, even misunderstood. But God is not making you difficult. He is making you dependable. He is teaching you to respond to His prompting quickly, to guard your spirit carefully, and to value obedience over convenience. If you feel more aware of God's presence, more sensitive to disobedience, and more drawn to quiet communion with Him, do not resist it. God is preparing you for decisions that will affect more than just you. Elevation brings responsibility, and responsibility requires a heart that listens closely. This sensitivity is a gift. It is God refining your spiritual instincts so that when He elevates you, you will not be led by pressure applause, or fear, but by his voice alone. Number 4. God allows hidden testing that no one else sees. Before God elevates a person publicly, he tests them privately. These tests rarely come with recognition. No one applauds your faithfulness. No one sees your obedience. No one knows the battles you fight in secret. And that is exactly the point. God is shaping who you are when no one is watching. Hidden testing often comes through quiet choices. Choosing integrity when compromise would be easier. Choosing forgiveness when bitterness feels justified. Choosing faith when doubt whispers loudly. These moments may feel small, but heaven pays close attention. God uses unseen tests to measure your readiness for visible responsibility. In Scripture, elevation always followed private faithfulness. Joseph resisted temptation in secret long before he ruled in public. David honored Saul in private caves before sitting on the throne. Esther remained faithful in preparation long before she stood before the king. God tests character before he entrusts influence. These hidden seasons can feel unfair. You may wonder why your obedience seems unnoticed, why your efforts feel invisible, or why others advance while you remain where you are. But God is not overlooking you. He is examining you. He is ensuring that when elevation comes, it will not expose immaturity, pride, or instability. Hidden testing also builds endurance. You learn to obey God without reward, to remain faithful without affirmation, and to trust his timing without explanation. This kind of faith cannot be taught publicly. It must be lived privately. If you are being tested in ways no one else sees, take heart. God is not delaying your elevation. He is qualifying you for it. What you pass in secret, God will reward openly. And when he lifts you, your foundation will be strong enough to hold what he places in your hands. Number 5. God begins to restrict certain paths while highlighting others. Another clear sign that God is setting you apart before he elevates you is when certain paths become inaccessible, no matter how hard you try to pursue them. Doors you expected to open remain closed. Opportunities that look good on the surface never come together. Plans you were confident about fall apart without clear explanation. This can feel frustrating, even discouraging, but it is often divine restriction, not rejection. When God is preparing to elevate you, he becomes very intentional about direction. He knows that not every open door leads to purpose, and not every opportunity is aligned with your calling. So he restricts paths that would delay you, damage you, or distract you from what he is building. What feels like denial is often protection. At the same time, you may notice that certain paths begin to stand out quietly. They may not look impressive. They may require faith. They may even feel uncomfortable. Yet there is peace there, clarity there. A sense of rightness that does not come from logic alone. God highlights what aligns with your purpose while dimming what does not. In Scripture, God repeatedly redirected his chosen ones. Paul was stopped from going where he wanted so he could go where he was needed. David was kept from shortcuts to the throne so his kingship would be established rightly. God's restrictions were not delays. They were safeguards. If you feel boxed in, redirected, or unable to move freely the way others do, don't assume you are stuck. God often narrows the path before elevation because focus is required at higher levels. He is training you to follow his leading, not your preference. Trust the closed doors. Pay attention to the quiet ones opening. God is not limiting your future. He is guiding it. And when elevation comes, you will look back and realize that every restriction kept you aligned with what only God could give. Number 6. God stretches your faith through delay and waiting. Waiting is one of the most misunderstood tools God uses to prepare someone for elevation. When God sets you apart, time can feel slower. Promises seem distant. Progress feels minimal. You may do everything you know to do, and still find yourself waiting. This is not stagnation. It is strengthening. God uses delay to stretch your faith beyond circumstances. Waiting reveals what you trust when outcomes are uncertain. It excels in patience, fear, and self-reliance, then replaces them with endurance, humility, and deeper dependence on God. Elevation requires faith that does not collapse under uncertainty. In the Bible, waiting was never wasted. Joseph waited years between promise and fulfillment. David waited through rejection and danger after being anointed. Abraham waited long past logic for what God had spoken. God does not rush what must last. Waiting seasons teach you to obey without immediate results, to hope without visible evidence, and to trust God's character more than His timing. This kind of faith cannot be learned quickly. It is formed through endurance. You may feel tempted to rush the process, to take shortcuts, or to settle for less just to escape the waiting. But God is using this season to build something steady within you. Elevation magnifies whatever is already present. If faith is shallow, elevation will expose it. If trust is deep, elevation will sustain it. If you are waiting right now, do not interpret it as silence. God is working in ways you cannot see. He is aligning timing, shaping character, and preparing circumstances that will make sense later. What feels like delay is often divine pacing. Stay faithful, stay obedient, stay anchored, because when God elevates you, you will realize the waiting did not slow you down. It strengthened you for what was ahead. Number 7, God builds humility and dependence before increasing influence. Before God elevates you, He makes sure you will not confuse influence with importance. One of the clearest signs that God is setting you apart is when He begins dismantling self-reliance and teaching you to depend fully on Him. This process is often uncomfortable because it touches the deepest parts of identity, how you see yourself, where you draw confidence from, and what you believe qualifies you. You may find that God allows situations where your abilities are not enough. Your experience does not guarantee success. Your effort does not produce immediate results. This is not because God is withholding help. It is because He is teaching you humility. Elevation without humility destroys people. God knows this, so He builds humility before He builds platforms. In Scripture, every person God elevated learned dependence first. Moses had to admit he could not speak well. Gideon had to accept that his strength was insufficient. Peter had to face his weakness before leading others. God does not shame weakness. He uses it to anchor you in grace. Humility grows when you realize that everything you carry comes from God. Your gifts, your opportunities, your open doors, they are not earned trophies. They are entrusted responsibilities. And when God sees that you no longer need recognition to remain faithful, He knows you can be trusted with influence. This season often feels like being overlooked or underestimated. Others may not see your potential. You may not even see it clearly yourself. But God is not concerned with appearances. He is shaping posture. He wants your heart positioned correctly before your life is positioned publicly. If you feel deeply aware of your need for God, if prayer has become less formal and more desperate, if pride has been replaced with surrender, this is preparation. God is building a foundation that will not crack under success. When elevation comes, you will know where your strength comes from. And because of that, your influence will point upward, not inward. Conclusion: set apart on purpose, elevated in God's time. Being set apart by God is not an accident, and it is never meaningless. Every quiet season, every delay, every closed door, every lonely stretch has been working together for something greater than you could see at the time. God does not separate people to abandon them. He separates them to prepare them. If you have recognized yourself in these signs, take heart. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. God has been shaping your character, sharpening your discernment, strengthening your faith, and anchoring your heart so that when elevation comes, it will not crush you. Elevation in God's kingdom is never about visibility alone. It is about responsibility. And God is careful with who he lifts because influence magnifies everything beneath it. That is why he takes time setting you apart. That is why he works deeply before he works publicly. That is why your process has been slow, quiet, and sometimes painful. Do not rush what God is doing. Do not envy paths that did not require preparation. And do not negate the power of a season where God is forming you in hidden places. What he is preparing will last, because it is built on obedience, humility, and trust. If this message spoke to your heart, take a moment to reflect on your season. Share what God has been teaching you. And if you want more faith-filled messages that encourage and strengthen you, like, comment, and subscribe. God sets apart before he elevates. And when he lifts you, you will know it was worth the wait.